Hi everyone, I'm Andy Bahalchik. Welcome to 28 Newsmakers. I'm sitting in for John Bendick, who has this weekend off. Our topic today, a neighborhood in Luzerne County very much under siege. We're talking about the gas-contaminated neighborhood in the Hazelton and Hazel Township area. Joining me tonight is our producer from 28 News, Jane Bugda, and three special guests, people who live in that neighborhood and are dealing with some big-time problems. We'll document here today and also give you some background on their stories. Kathleen Lapchak, Pat Tomshow, and Carol Kay. Thank you for joining us here today on 28 News. Again, a neighborhood under siege. That story today here on 28 Newsmakers. We'll be right back. And welcome back to 28 Newsmakers. I'm Andy Bahalchik. Again, John Bendick, the usual host, is off this weekend. And my co-host, as usual, Jane Bugda, our 28 News, one of our executive producers. And three lovely ladies from the Hazelton area, Kathleen Lapchak, Pat Tomshow, and Carol Kay. The main reason we're here today is to talk about a very crucial and timely situation, one that has been getting seemingly worse over the last several months, the gas contamination in the Hazelton area. 28 News has covered the story at length over the past 5 or 6 months, but we have found out, and we have found out in a very, sometimes a drastic way, that this story has been developing really for the past 10, 15, 20 years, and these people and their families have to deal with it as far as dealing with gas contamination and what problems that may cause down the road. First of all, let's look back at one of our stories we've done in the last several days, giving you some background on the situation. About a week and a half ago, some high-ranking officials, people with the U.S. Senator's office, Rick Santorum, our inspector, visited Pat Tomshow's home. Let's take a look at that day, and we'll come back with our special guests.
We came home on October 31st, it was 1993, from his retirement dinner to an overwhelming, unbelievably strong smell of raw gasoline.
This might look like anyone's kitchen table on any given morning, but this is not a normal neighborhood, and this talk deals potentially with life and death.
That 50,000 gallon estimate was derived from Trangwich alone.
It is the home of Pat Tomshow on 22nd Street in Hazelton. Officials from the offices of Senators our inspector and Rick Santorum are here, as are State Representative Todd Eachus and Hazelton Mayor Lou Barletta. They are pushing the EPA to clean up this area. Tomshow and about 400 other people here are affected by a gas spill, namely benzene fumes, which are found in gasoline. The gas spilled from at least 4 sites, including the old Trangwich service station on Church Street. Residents here say the EPA has been double-talking them. These people came here today to change all that.
I think that people are paying attention to our message, and they're looking to help us work this all out and to protect the neighborhood, which is our primary concern. That's it.
The group then toured the neighborhood and met with other residents, most of whom say they are not happy at all with the EPA response.
Currently, there are 23 homes being tested in a population of 400 homes. We want to know why all 400 homes aren't being tested for levels of toxins. We want to make that happen.
Andy Bahalchik, 28 News. Now, of course, many things have changed since that particular story was done about a week and a half ago. And quite frankly, ladies and Jane, we've seen things, documentation brought today that we're wondering, why is it taking so long to get something done? Jane?
Well, first of all, before we forge ahead, let's take us back to the beginning. When did the neighbors start talking to each other and say, hey, there's something wrong here? When did y'all start noticing something?
I guess what we noticed is originally back in 1993, when all of our homes smelled overwhelmingly of gasoline, and at that time we had called initially the fire department and then subsequently the Department of Environmental Protection, who came by and had wands that they tested our homes and in varying degrees decided whether we had a problem or not. Most of us were just told to keep our windows open and let our homes air out and the problem would go away, and that's what we did. At that point, we were just basically told things were under control, and most of us went along with our lives feeling that we were all right. It wasn't until the summer of 2000 that information started to come to all of us, and at that time, that's when we organized the group and started to get various areas investigated and looked at and tried to get help for everybody. Would you agree?
Yes, and what was most upsetting, I guess in the summer, one of our neighbors had died from leukemia, and we found out that a few other of our neighbors were diagnosed. In fact, someone right across the street from the gentleman I'm talking about was diagnosed with the same leukemia, which has been found to cause the causation link between the benzene and the leukemia. And it's very upsetting because, like Pat said, we were under the false impression that we had a problem, they were aware of it, they were taking care of it, we did not have to worry about it on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, that was very, very false. And we lived for years under very false pretenses and a very false sense of security, I guess, and that has me very upset and angry that we weren't made aware of the severity of the gasoline leak.
I brought some papers along today which substantiate a lot of what we're telling you, but it was definitely known that the gasoline was leaked and moved throughout the neighborhood, not by the neighbors, but by the officials, by DEP and EPA. At no time did they notify any of us that benzene was a carcinogen, that we might have a health problem from benzene, that chemicals were running through our sewer systems and in the groundwater. At no time were we ever warned. I brought my 2 children up in this home, and I have to worry about what their health is going to be for the next 10 to 15 years. Is that right, Kathy?
Yes, it could be I'm a registered nurse, and it could be a latency period of effects, 5 to 15-year time period. What especially is troubling to me is the EPA defines the benzene as a Class A carcinogen. That means that it is a compound definitely known to cause cancer in humans. I'm sure that back in 1993, when the gasoline fumes first surfaced, I would imagine that I would expect that DER, DEP would have been aware of that definition. And as such, my question is, why did they let us live 7 years knowing the effects of the benzene on the bone marrow? It primarily affects the bone marrow. That's the prime target. That's where the blood cells are made, both red blood cells and white blood cells. And as it breaks down through my research, the benzene can attach to the DNA and RNA of the cell, which is the code of life. And that's where the cancer-causing effects come in, mostly with anemias, leukemias. The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of America, I had a printout from them. It says how to avoid developing a leukemia, and one of it is to avoid exposure to certain chemicals, and one of them that they listed is avoid benzene because there's a causal relationship between the benzene and the leukemia.
Is your group doing any type of surveys to ask families a history to see just maybe how far back they are linking some of these illnesses to?
On 2 levels. We did an informal one, which Kathy has, and the Andy Benyo through Hazel Township has hired Dr. Evelyn Talbot out of University of Pittsburgh to do the 77 homes that are in the township, and she's going to be looking at a total survey of what illnesses are in the township. I guess our concern is that a lot of what's happening, it's a little too late, because the spill occurred prior to 1993 and 4. It's during those years that the heaviest concentration of benzene and xylene and toluene, MTBE, were affecting our homes. It was also during that time that no one tested our health, our homes, the air quality. They may have tested the soil quality, but they certainly weren't doing it in our homes or in our backyards. And so our biggest concern is the fact that all of that time went by and we were all exposed every day, day in and day out. The standards they were using to test just initially were based on the OSHA standards, which are 8-hour workdays, which is vastly different than people who live in that home and are breathing in the air 24 hours a day. So that's the major concern that we have. And I have to add that the vent systems that they did put in have been mixed success.
Well, one of the facts I like to bring up is the fact that I live quite a distance away, a few blocks away, never thinking that it would get as far as my house. So that is the concern. And then I had the vent system put in right away, and then everything went up higher. We may talk about the benzene in it, but there's other ones that could cause just as much damage. I mean, we have like the elderly there, and they're afraid to bring their grandchildren in the house. There's a lot of asthmatic conditions. Do we know that it's caused by that? It's a good chance that it was caused by that.
Carol, I know where your house is located, and we've been down there numerous times documenting these facts. So you're saying when they put this vent trap in, the initial vent trap,
Right.
the benzene levels and other toxics actually went higher
Yes.
than before you had the trap in.
Yes.
Now you have a new system put in,
They're putting a new system in.
and
It's like what they call a French drain around the outside of the house with the fan that'll be going all the time outside of the house. But just today they put in what would you call it, Pat? A vapor.
Oh, it's a carbon filtration system.
Carbon filtration system in my home. It's about the size of a small refrigerator, and it's supposed to run constantly until they could get the fan for the outside.
you know what I find amazing about it? I know we've talked about this before. We reported this back in October, November, when they had the big meeting in Hazleton Area High School, and quite frankly, we would hear tidbits about problems in the neighborhood. But it seemed until that meeting, when it came to a Hal bill, I know Todd Eaches had a lot to do with that, State Representative Eaches, and I know you three individuals have been very active. Up until then, it was almost as if it was a non-existent problem or minor detail, and then as it came to a head at that meeting, that everyone realized, like, wow, this is life and death here.
Yeah.
So when you say about not knowing, it's been there all these years, and you have the documentation to prove it.
And how
Yes.
far it spread.
We've been mentioning Trangwich as one of the main contributors to this spill, but it's just not one gas station. How many have been linked?
It's a good question.
Or at least suspected.
They suspect 4. It actually took an editorial by several of the neighbors in which they named the 4 for Mr. Fetzer from the EPA to name them. But they named Sam's Amoco, Orlowski's, Trangwich, and Hazleton Standard as the 4 contributing stations. And the estimate that they gave, the 50,000 gallon spill, was based only on Trangwich. They did not estimate what the other stations had leaked. And I guess, our concern is we've lived there already for 7 years. And frankly, the attitude of GAG, which stands for Group Against Gas, is that they feel we should be bought out. They feel that the government should step in. 7 years that we know of have elapsed, that we've been exposed to known carcinogens. And at this point, we feel it is time to buy us out. They've told us, at best, it will take 5 to 10 years if they are ever able to clean up the spill. And they don't think they're really going to be able to clean it up because it's through the rocks into the mine, and it's polluting the groundwater, it's polluting the soil, and I guess our question is, why should we have to continue to live there and be exposed continuously to more chemicals?
And that's if there are no other, let me just raise it, being plain devil's advocate, if there are no other source of gasoline still there. You know, being from that area, I know for a fact there were a lot of mom and pop gas stations. A lot of people did, like all over the area, had workshops, gasoline storage tanks, disposal, who knows who what, threw what into the sewer system or into the ground in their backyard. You're living downhill from up on 9th Street, Cyber Street, Wyoming Street. So who knows if it's still not leaking into the area.
It's not even downhill, it's going uphill too because of the vapors. So you're not safe anywhere in that area.
No, and they've defined the spill as only going to Church Street, but Sam's is across the street.
Right.
And there are homes right around him, some on well water. I know the home behind Sam's had such an overpowering smell at one time.
I covered that, Pat, very quickly. We, back in 91 or 92, it came over as a smell of gas in the sewers. Hazel Township Fire Company responded. We responded. 28 News was there. We did live shots that night, and it dissipated. They vented the homes, but that home behind the Amico was evacuated. I believe there was a donut shop there at the time also across, and they smelled it there. And that, as we were covering all these stories, and you produced documentation, the light bulb went off and said, wait a minute, I remember 8-9 years ago, and they never found the source of gas, and it was just written off. Again, no one's at fault. At that point, as far as the fire company was concerned, well, someone must have dumped something in the sewers, which, you know, people will do sometimes, and it dissipated. But that probably was the first real red flag that you guys are in trouble, was something was happening in that neighborhood.
That is what we were originally told when we smelled the gas in our home, that probably someone had dumped something into the sewer. We were told to put ammonia down our drains, flush it with water. That seemed to, we vented the home, slept with the windows open.
Let's put some perfume over the manure.
And, you know, that happened, and then it dissipated, and we smelled gasoline again. Called the fire department at the time. We were told to come up to the fire department. They gave me a chemical called eliminol that they use at accident sites with gasoline spills to dump that down our sewer line, flush it with water. And then any further calls that we had, then they told us to call the DER and have them come into the home and check the home. What's especially so troubling to me is that there are no known studies dealing with the fact of chronic exposure to the toxins in the gasoline. And the Health and Human Service Department defines chronic exposure as 365 days plus. I say to you, we're 24 hours, 365 days, possibly as long as 10 years. So that is extremely troubling to me. You know, I feel that we are at risk. They have started, the health department has started doing some blood testing of our neighbors, complete blood counts.
And that's what we are going to talk about when we come back. Right now, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more of 28 Newsmakers.
Welcome back to 28 Newsmakers. Andy Bohalchik in for John Bendick, Jane Ann Bugda, Kathleen Lapchak, Pat Tom Show, and Carol Kay. Familiar names if you ever watch 28 News at all or read the local newspapers. You've heard these names, and quite frankly, we're talking about a life and death situation here. Gas contamination in the Hazleton area, Hazel Township, near 22nd Street, North Church Street. These people are dealing with a nightmare. And again, the health department's not saying it for sure. They can't prove it per se, but there's an unusually high number of leukemia cases in that neighborhood. And I guess the bottom line, folks, is wherever you're watching, this can't happen in your neighborhood. And maybe it is already happening from some other pollutant. And what we're trying to find out is our EPA and DEP doing their job? Did they drop the ball here? Jane?
We were talking about your blood testing and the venting of your homes. Now let's talk about the medical testing. What type of testing have you been through so far?
Privately, my husband and I went to our family doctor and we had tests done for like benzene and the metabolates, the breakdown products of the gasoline in our bloodstream. So we've done that privately, but I have been very big on encouraging the Department of Health to get involved and offer all of the neighborhood testing, and what they have offered, and it has only started this past Monday. Blood testing, CBC, which is a complete blood count, that is done with cooperation with the Greater Hazelton Health Organization at Hazelton St. Joe's Medical Center, and it is a free test. It's going to be covered by the Department of Health. Anyone who lived in the area between the years of 1990 to the present are eligible for the testing.
I had a test. I was one, and there was about 7 people that could go for a blood test in the beginning, and I have yet to get the results on that, and that was done on December 17th. At that time, they took 2 vials out of me, and they were going to send it for testing, but I haven't had any results yet. But one thing I wanted to mention, Andy, is that my home was one of the highest ones, the readings. I've never smelled anything. Till today, I've never smelled anything. So that's the scary part. You never smelled anything.
And there are, the initial estimates of the homes involved, interest in immediate, went from 75 to 100 homes to 250 to 300 to 400, almost as magically as the 1 million gallons of gas went down to 50,000 overnight.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
And I just think a lot of people are angry and disgusted down there, and understandably so. Now, there are people, let me just ask you this question. Are people in the neighborhood, are there some now awakening to the point that this is a problem? They're realizing this is not, because you said you didn't smell it. And I remember talking to people over the years, they said, well, my house is fine, we're not sick, we don't smell anything. That doesn't mean you don't have a problem down there.
Exactly.
Yes, especially since the hydrocarbons in the gasoline, the benzene, the xylene, toluene, MTB are odorless. They're colorless. So they're there constantly. I mean, when we smell the raw product of gasoline, yes, you were aware that that was in your home. You vented your windows, you got out of your home. And that is the very, scary tragedy to me. And Andy, you touched on the fact that it is something that can happen in any town, USA. It probably is happening. And I fear, as the underground storage tanks age nationally, I think this is going to be a very big problem, not only locally, but nationally and possibly internationally. And, I think the gasoline petroleum industry should also be called.
Called on the carpet.
Yes.
Yep.
No, go ahead.
Good. Well, I don't think we can overstate the fact that we're victims. Our 400 homes are the victims of local gas spillers. And I don't feel that they maybe intentionally poisoned us, but we've been poisoned. And we lived in ignorance for all those years, exposing our friends and our families, our children, and ourselves to this. Our homes have absolutely no value. When I did the surveys, some of the questions where I wanted to, or some of the responses where I wanted to retire, but I can't sell my home and retire. I wanted to go to not a nursing home, but a senior living home, and my home was going to be used to get me in there. Another question or another response was that my children are starting college and I won't be able to get a home equity loan to fund their college. This is serious business to people. I know that some people feel it's unfair that we're not going to be taxed, and that was a great concession, and I appreciate everybody that did it, from the county commissioners on down to our local people and our local school board. But truthfully, our homes are worth nothing. And as such, many of us have our lifelong savings in them. Kathy.
What is especially troubling to me. Yes, our homes, the monetary value. But I think good health is priceless. No one can put a monetary value on our health. In the past 3 weeks, we had one of our neighbors, an older woman, die from leukemia. Last Saturday, one of our younger neighbors, a 42-year-old gentleman, lost his battle to Hodgkin's lymphoma. And that is just so troubling. This is like results of our partial survey that Group Against Gas has done. We've had 4 diagnosed cases of leukemia that they can directly relate to the gasoline spill, 2 brain tumors, 1 Hodgkin's, cases of asthma, a lot of nosebleeds, which that would come into play with a lower platelet, which would be the effects of the chemical on the bone marrow. There are reproductive disorders such as ovarian cysts, endometriosis, breast cancers, female reproductive cancers, prostate cancers, bladder cancers, lung cancer. The most common effects that I've read through my reading is again on the bone marrow, the blood in the bone marrow, but they've said it potentially could cause liver, brain, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, also miscarriages, also preterm delivery of babies, and no one really knows the effects on.
So, but right now, and you're trying to get a history of this in your neighborhood. Let me ask you quickly about the Green Ribbon Campaign. Tell us a little bit about that. You're all wearing green ribbons.
Carol, you take it. Your seniors are doing it.
Oh yeah, I have my seniors cutting the ribbon for us because I'm the director at the Hazelton Senior Center. Help me with this because I keep forgetting. Green stands for gag.
Requires exceptional environmental conditions now.
Yes. So, and then if you come to our neighborhood, you're going to see the green.
You know, a lot of people get paid a lot of money to come up with acronyms.
That wasn't too bad.
Not getting any money, I can tell you that much. Well, I saw the green corsages, and that's the effort to
Green
remind.
and clean, Andy, green and clean. And I'd just like to end with a quote from Harriet Beecher Stowe. The truth is the kindest thing we can give folks in the end, and I really think that that's all that we're asking. We want the truth. We want the truth about when it's spilled, how many gallons of gasoline spilled, what are going to be the long-term effects on our health, on our homes. Right now we're prisoners in our home.
I've got to tell you that, and we want to point out that we are going to invite the Environmental Protection Agency, the DEP, local lawmakers, namely the agencies who are in charge of protecting us and protecting our environment and protecting our environment. That's in a show to come up hopefully next month, a couple of weeks or so. I want to thank, first of all, Jan Bugda, of course, my colleague here at 28 News, Kathleen Lapchak, Pat Thomas, and Carol Kay. And I have to tell you, folks, we've covered a lot of stories over the years, good, the bad, and the ugly. And the best thing we can do is hopefully shed some light, where there's otherwise darkness, and the unknown is what's scary here.
Absolutely.
And I know you guys have to live with it and deal with it, and we wish you the best. And also, but along with the wishes, there's some hard questions that have to be answered. And at this point, there are too many unanswered questions. So thank you for joining us, Jan. Thank you again. And again, thank you for all those of you at home watching us. This is 28 Newsmakers. John Bendick will be back next month. And again, our next show will have, hopefully, either next show or the show after, the EPA and the DEP talking about the gas contamination in the Hazelton area. Thanks for joining us, and have a great one. Be safe.
And crossed the center line into Trooper Tuggle's lane. Trooper Tuggle's vehicle struck the unoccupied truck and went into a roadside ditch. The trooper was air evacuated to a hospital where he went through a 6-month recovery period for several broken bones, lacerations, and contusions. He was wearing a lap and shoulder belt. The airbag